Yesterday morning, I was standing in my own kitchen, the one I've cooked in for 47 years, when my daughter-in-law pointed her finger right in my face and said, "This is not your house anymore." My hands went still. The coffee cup I was holding felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I had welcomed that woman into my family. I had bitten my tongue for years. I had smiled through things that would have made my own mother weep. But something shifted in me that morning. Something quiet and final, like a door closing softly, but forever. I set down that coffee cup, and I said 7 words that changed everything. That morning started like every other morning. I woke up before the sun, put on my robe, walked down the hallway in the dark, the same hallway I've walked down for 47 years. I knew every creak in that floor. I started the coffee. Pulled out my favorite mug, the blue one my son gave me for Mother's Day, back when he was still in middle school. I stood at the window and watched the birds come to the feeder. That was my time. My quiet. My peace. I wasn't bothering anyone. I wasn't asking for anything. I was just an old woman in her kitchen, grateful for one more morning. And then I heard the door. She walked in without knocking. She never knocked. I had stopped mentioning it. I turned around and smiled. That's what I always did. I smiled first. I kept things easy. I kept things light. But that morning, she didn't smile back. She stood in the middle of my kitchen. The kitchen where I raised my son, where I baked the birthday cakes, where I sat up late waiting for him to come home safe, and she looked at me like I was in her way. She had a look on her face I had never seen before. Or maybe I had seen it. Maybe I just never let myself believe it was real. She crossed her arms. And then she started talking. I won't repeat everything she said. Some words aren't worth repeating. But the last thing she said, the final thing, I have never forgotten. She pointed her finger at me, right at my face. And she said, "This is not your house anymore." I didn't move. I stood there holding that blue coffee mug, and I felt something happen inside me. Not anger, not tears. Something quieter than that. Something final. It was like a door closing, softly, but all the way. I had given that woman 7 years. 7 years of patience, of biting my tongue, of choosing peace over pride. I had welcomed her into my home, into my family, into every holiday and every hard moment. And she stood in my kitchen, in front of my window and my bird feeder and my 47 years, and spoke to me like I was nothing. I set down the coffee mug. I looked her in the eye. And I said 7 words I should have said a long time ago. But before I tell you what those words were, you need to understand how we got here. Because this didn't start that morning. It started long before. Karen didn't come into this family as an enemy.
I want to be clear about that.
The first time my son brought her home, she was nervous. I could see it in the way she held her purse, tight, with both hands, like she wasn't sure where to put herself. I liked her immediately. She had a quiet kind of confidence. She looked my son in the eye when she talked to him. She helped me clear the table without being asked. Small things. But I noticed small things. After dinner, she stood next to me at the sink, and we washed dishes together. She asked about the photographs on my wall. She wanted to know the stories behind them. Nobody asks about the photographs anymore. I thought, this one is different. This one is good for him. And for a while I was right. The first 2 years were easy. She called me on weekdays sometimes just to talk. She remembered my doctor appointments. She'd text me a photo of something that made her think of me, a flower, a recipe, a funny sign in a store window. I kept every one of those photos. She spent Christmas Eve at my house 3 years in a row. We stayed up past midnight putting together toys for the kids, laughing at the instructions, drinking the same terrible eggnog I make every year because my mother made it and her mother made it before that. Those were real nights.
Good nights.
I don't know exactly when things shifted. That's the hardest part. There was no single moment I can point to and say, there. That's where it changed. It was gradual. The calls got shorter. Then they stopped. The visits felt different, tense, like everyone was careful about what they said. She started answering my questions with one word. She stopped asking about the photographs. I told myself she was busy. She and my son had 2 children now. Life gets full. I understood that. I made excuses for every sign. But somewhere in those years, the woman who stood next to me at the sink and asked about my pictures, she became someone else. Or maybe she just finally became who she always was. I'll never know which one is true. What I do know is this. I kept loving her through all of it. I kept showing up. I kept making room. And there was one moment early on where something felt off. A comment she made.
A look she gave.
I ignored it. That was my mistake. It was Thanksgiving. The 3rd one we had all spent together. I had been cooking since 6 in the morning. Turkey, stuffing, sweet potatoes, 2 pies. The whole table set with the good dishes, the ones I only bring out a few times a year. Everyone was there. My son.
Karen.
The kids. My sister and her husband. A full house. A loud house. The kind of noise I used to pray for when I was sitting alone in the quiet years before the grandchildren came.
Dinner was going well.
People were laughing. The food was good. I felt proud. And then Karen made a comment. It was during dessert. I had brought out the pecan pie, my mother's recipe, the one I have made every Thanksgiving for 30 years. I set it on the table and my sister said, the way she always does, "Nobody makes it like you do." And Karen laughed. Not a warm laugh. A small, sharp one. And she said, without looking up from her plate, "It's a little sweet for me." I've never really understood the obsession. The table went quiet for just a second. Then my son said something to change the subject. Someone else started a new conversation. And just like that, the moment passed. But I felt it. I felt every person at that table decide in the space of that 1 second not to say anything. And I made the same decision. I smiled. I cut the pie. I kept going. That was the moment. Right there. That was the first time I should have said something, gently, calmly, without making a scene. I could have looked at her and said, "That's my mother's recipe, Karen. It matters to me." Just that. Nothing harsh. Nothing dramatic. Just the truth. But I didn't. Because I didn't want to ruin the holiday. I didn't want to embarrass my son. I didn't want to be the grandmother who couldn't take a joke. So I swallowed it. And Karen learned something that Thanksgiving. She learned that she could say what she wanted at my table. She learned that I would smile and keep going. She learned that there were no consequences. I handed her power that day without realizing it. And over the next few years, she used it. A little more each time. A little bolder. A little less careful. Because why would she be careful? I had shown her with my silence that she didn't need to be. That lesson cost me years. And it all started with the pecan pie. My son David is a good man. I need you to understand that before I say anything else. He is kind. He works hard. He has never once made me feel like a burden. He calls every Sunday without fail, rain or shine, has done it for 20 years. I raised him right, and I am proud of him. But David has a blind spot. And that blind spot has a name. When you love someone the way David loves Karen, you see what you want to see. You fill in the gaps. You smooth over the rough edges in your own mind before anyone else even notices them. I understand that. I loved his father the same way once. But it made talking to David about Karen almost impossible. The first time I tried, it was about a year after the Thanksgiving. I chose my words carefully. I sat down with him, just the 2 of us, and I told him, quietly, without drama, that some of the things Karen said made me feel small. He listened. He nodded. And then he said, "Mom, that's just her sense of humor. She doesn't mean anything by it." I didn't push. I let it go. The second time I tried, 2 years later, I was more specific. I gave him examples.
Dates.
Actual words she had used. He got uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat. And then he said what men say when they don't know what else to say. "I'll talk to her." He never talked to her. Or if he did, nothing changed. The third time I didn't try at all. Because by then I understood something. David was not going to see it. Not from me. I was his mother. In his mind, mothers and wives don't mix, and if they clash, there must be a misunderstanding somewhere. He always assumed the misunderstanding was mine. That hurt more than anything Karen ever said. Not because he was cruel,
but because he was kind about it. He'd squeeze my hand.
He'd change the subject gently. He loved me, and he still couldn't see me.
There's a particular loneliness in that.
Being invisible to someone who loves you. I stopped bringing it to him. I started carrying it alone.
And carrying it alone changed me.
I became careful around my own son. Measured. I stopped saying what I really thought. I started performing fine instead of being fine. No mother should have to perform for her child. But there was something David didn't know. Something Karen had said, not to me, but to someone else. And when he finally found out, it broke something open in him. That conversation was still years away, but it was coming. I could have kept carrying it forever. The hurt, the silence, the years of swallowed words. I had made a kind of peace with it, not a good peace, but the kind you make when you decide that keeping the family together matters more than keeping score. I was willing to do that. For David. For the grandchildren. But then the grandchildren became the reason I couldn't. There were two of them. Lily, who was 8, and James, who had just turned 6. I watched those children come into this world. I was in that hospital waiting room both times, pacing the same stretch of linoleum until my knees ached. I loved them the way only grandmothers love, completely, without condition, without keeping anything back. And they loved me. When they were small, they did. But children are sponges. They absorb everything in the house they grow up in. Every tone, every eye roll, every long pause that comes after someone's name is mentioned. I started noticing it in Lily first. She was always the sharper of the two, quick eyes, quick mind. She started mimicking her mother's tone when she spoke to me. Not cruelly. She didn't know it was cruel. She was 8. She was just doing what children do, becoming the people she lived with. She'd cut me off mid-sentence. She'd sigh when I talked too long. Once, she looked at a photo album I was showing her and said, "Grandma, this is kind of boring." Then she put it down and walked away. I sat there holding that album for a long time. Karen never corrected her. That was the part that stayed with me. Not Lily's words. She was a child. Children say thoughtless things. But Karen was standing right there. She heard it, and she said nothing, because to correct it, she would have had to believe it was wrong. That afternoon I drove home, and I sat in my car in the driveway, and I asked myself a question I had been avoiding for years. What are these children learning?
Not just about me.
About women. About age. About what happens when someone older, someone quieter, someone who doesn't fight back, walks into a room. Are they learning to respect that person? Or are they learning that it's acceptable to dismiss her? I knew the answer,
and it terrified me.
This was no longer about my feelings. My feelings I could manage. I had managed them for years. But I was not willing to let those children grow up believing that what they were seeing was normal. That was the moment everything inside me shifted. Not with anger, with clarity. Let me tell you what 7 years of silence actually looks like. It looks like arriving at Christmas dinner with your arms full of gifts and food and being greeted with a nod instead of a thank you. It looks like sitting at the far end of your own son's table, talking to whoever will talk to you, pretending you don't notice that the seat next to Karen is always the last one filled. It looks like driving home alone on holidays, replaying conversations in your head, wondering if you said something wrong, even when you know you didn't. That was my life. For 7 years. I missed my granddaughter's 6th birthday party. Karen said it was a small gathering, family only. I found out 2 weeks later from my sister that 12 people had been there. I wasn't family enough, apparently. I said nothing. One Easter, I brought a ham. I had ordered it specially, from the same butcher I've used for 30 years. Karen took one look at it and said they were doing things differently this year, lighter, healthier, and put it in the back of the refrigerator. We ate a quinoa salad and store-bought rolls. I smiled through the whole meal. There was a Sunday afternoon when I stopped by unannounced, something I used to do freely, the way parents do, the way I thought I was still allowed to. Karen met me at the door. She didn't open it all the way. She told me they were busy. I could see the television on behind her. I could hear the children playing. I drove home and cried in a way I hadn't cried in years. And still, I said nothing. I told myself I was being the bigger person. I told myself I was protecting David, protecting the children, keeping the peace. But here is the truth I have had to sit with since. I wasn't being noble. I was being afraid. Afraid that if I spoke, I would lose access to my grandchildren. Afraid that David would have to choose, and might not choose me. Afraid that saying the true thing out loud would make it more true somehow, more permanent, more broken. So I kept quiet. And every time I did, the situation got a little worse. Because silence, I have learned, does not preserve things. It just lets the wrong things grow undisturbed. I gave that woman 7 years of my dignity in exchange for the illusion of peace. It was not peace. It was just quieter suffering. And even the quietest suffering has a limit. Mine was running out. That morning, Karen had come to pick up the children. They had spent the night with me. Something that still happened, thank God, something Karen hadn't taken from me yet. We had made pancakes. We had watched cartoons in our pajamas. It was a good night. A normal, quiet, good night. I was still in my robe when she arrived. She walked in without knocking. Like always. Went straight to the back room to get the children's bags. I stood in the kitchen and waited. I had coffee ready. I had even set out a cup for her, the way I always did, out of habit, out of hope. She came back down the hallway and stopped in the kitchen doorway. I could tell immediately that something was wrong. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were somewhere else. Whatever mood she had arrived in, she had brought it from home. It had nothing to do with me. But I was the one who was there. She looked around my kitchen slowly. The way you look at a place you've decided you don't respect. And then she started. She said I had given Lily too much sugar the night before. We'd had ice cream after dinner the way we always did, the way grandmothers are supposed to. I opened my mouth to respond, gently, calmly. She didn't let me finish. She said I undermined her parenting, that I always had, that I let the children do whatever they wanted when they were with me, and then she had to deal with the consequences. I stayed calm. I kept my voice low. I said I understood her concerns, and we could talk about it. She took one step closer. She said I needed to understand something. That things were different now. That David and she made the decisions for this family. That my role was to follow their rules, or not be involved. I set down my coffee cup. And then she said it. She pointed her finger right at my face in my kitchen, in front of my window and my bird feeder and my 47 years, and she said, "This is not your house anymore." The room went completely still. I looked at her finger. I looked at her face. And I felt something I had never quite felt before in all those 7 years. Not anger, not hurt, not fear. Just done. I was simply, completely, finally done. I took one breath. I looked her in the eye. And I said the 7 words that changed everything. She didn't see them coming. Neither did I. I didn't raise my voice. That's the part one wants you to understand. After 7 years. After the birthday party I wasn't invited to. After the Easter ham in the back of the refrigerator. After the door that didn't open all the way. After the finger pointed in my face in my own kitchen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't reach back through all those years of hurt and throw any of it at her. I just looked her in the eye. Steady. Still. Like I had finally, after all that time, found solid ground beneath my feet. And I said, quietly, clearly, without a single waver in my voice, "I will not be treated this way." 7 words. She blinked. The finger came down. Something moved across her face that I had never seen there before. Not in 7 years of holidays and kitchens and carefully swallowed words. She looked uncertain, and I kept going. Still quiet, still calm. I told her that I had spent 7 years making room for her comfort at the expense of my own dignity. I told her that I had bitten my tongue at my own table, in my own home, for the sake of keeping peace in a family I had built long before she arrived. I told her I was done doing that. I was not cruel. I did not attack her. I did not list every grievance, every slight, every long drive home with tears I cried alone. That was not the point. The point was one thing, and one thing only. This ends today. I told her she was welcome in my home. She would always be welcome in my home. But she would come in through the door with respect, or she would not come in at all. She stood there for a long moment. I could see her deciding what to do with this version of me. This version she had never met before. She opened her mouth once, then closed it. She called the children. She gathered their bags. She walked to the door. And just before she left, she stopped. She didn't turn around. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say anything at all. She just stood there for a second, one hand on the door frame, and then she walked out. I stood in my kitchen, alone, heart pounding. And then something remarkable happened. I felt, for the first time in 7 years, like myself. Fully, completely, quietly myself. But the silence that followed lasted 3 weeks. And those were the 3 hardest weeks of my life. The first day, I told myself it was fine.
She needed time.
I needed time. These things don't resolve themselves overnight. I made my coffee, fed the birds, went about my day. I was steady. I was sure. By the 3rd day, the doubt crept in. That's what silence does. It doesn't just sit there quietly. It fills up with every fear you've ever had. It asks questions you can't answer. It replays the same moment over and over at 2 in the morning when there's nothing else to listen to. Had I gone too far? Had I said it wrong? Should I have waited, chosen a better moment, softer words? I picked up the phone to call David 4 times that first week. For times I set it back down, because I knew that if I called, I would apologize. Not because I was wrong, but because the silence was unbearable and apologizing would end it. That's what I had always done. That was the old pattern. Speak, feel guilty, take it back, make it easier for everyone else. I was not willing to do that again, so I sat with it. I went to church on Sunday and held myself together until the last hymn, and then I cried in my car for 20 minutes. I called my sister, not to complain, just to hear a voice that loved me without conditions. She said, "You did the right thing. Now hold the line." I held the line. Week 2 was harder than week 1. The grandchildren didn't call. That was the part that hollowed me out. Not David's silence. Not Karen's. But Lily and James, who didn't know what had happened, who were just children living inside whatever story the adults around them were telling. I missed them in a way that had a physical weight to it. I baked. I cleaned things that didn't need cleaning. I sat in the backyard in the evenings and watched the sky go dark and asked God to hold everything together while I held this one thing firm. I did not reach out first. Not because I was proud. Not because I was keeping score. But because I understood, maybe for the first time in my life, that reaching out first would have told everyone, including me, that my word meant nothing. That my limit had no edge. And it did. It finally did. 23 days after Karen walked out of my kitchen, I heard a knock at my front door. A real knock. The kind that waits for an answer. I looked through the window. It was David. Alone. And the look on his face told me that something had finally broken open. I opened the door, and I looked at my son. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a bad night's sleep. The kind that comes from carrying something heavy for too long and finally putting it down. I stepped aside. He came in. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where everything had happened 23 days before. I poured him coffee, without asking. I sat across from him, And for a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he said, "Mom, I owe you an apology." I had waited years to hear those words, and now that they were in the room, I didn't know what to do with them. I just nodded. I let him keep going. He told me he had spent the last 3 weeks thinking. Really thinking, not explaining away, not smoothing over, not taking the path of least resistance the way he admitted he had always done when it came to Karen and me. He said he had gone back through years of things in his mind. Things he had seen and dismissed. Comments he had laughed off. Moments where I had tried to tell him something, and he had chosen not to hear it. He said he was ashamed of that. I reached across the table and put my hand on his. I told him I had never blamed him. And I meant it. Blame was not what I needed from David. What I needed was exactly what was happening. My son, sitting across from me, finally seeing clearly. He talked for a long time. I listened. He told me that after I put my foot down, Karen had come home furious. That there had been arguments. Long ones. The kind that stripped things back to the bone. And in one of those arguments, something came out. Something Karen had said, not to me, not in front of David, but to her own mother on the phone, months earlier. A conversation David had overheard by accident and filed away, the way we file away things we aren't ready to face. He was ready to face it now. He told me what she had said. I sat very still while he talked. The kitchen was quiet. The birds were at the feeder outside the window. Everything was ordinary, and nothing was ordinary at all. When he finished, I understood Karen in a way I hadn't before. I didn't excuse what she had done, but I understood it. And understanding, I have learned, is not the same as forgetting. It is just the first step toward deciding what comes next. David looked at me across that table, my son, my boy, and asked me what I wanted to do. For the first time in 7 years, someone was asking me that question. What David told me was not what I expected. I had prepared myself for something ugly. Some grievance I had never known about. Some version of me, through Karen's eyes, that I would have to sit with and reckon with. But it wasn't that. What Karen had said to her mother, in that phone call David overheard, was this. That she felt invisible in our family, that every room David and I were in together, she disappeared. That the way David talked about me, looked at me, deferred to me, made her feel like she would never be enough. Like she was always being quietly measured against something she could never be. She wasn't talking about hatred. She was talking about fear. I sat with that for a long time after David said it. Because I recognized it. Not from my own marriage, but from watching my own mother-in-law years ago when David was small. The way she would arrive at my house and rearrange things. The way she would correct me in front of David without realizing she was doing it. The way her love for her son took up all the air in the room. I had told myself I would never be that woman. And yet, I am not saying I was wrong to set my boundary. I was not wrong. What Karen did, the years of dismissal, the pointed finger, the words in my kitchen, none of that was acceptable. Understanding someone's pain does not make their behavior right. But sitting at that table, listening to David, I had to ask myself an honest question. Had I ever made Karen feel welcome in the way that actually mattered to her? Not welcome at my table, I had always done that. But welcome in David's heart? Had I ever stepped back far enough, graciously enough, to let her feel like she was first? I wasn't sure the answer was yes. That didn't make her cruelty my fault. Pain is not a permission slip. But it did mean that what had broken between us was not one-sided. It had been breaking from both ends, slowly for years. And neither of us had said a word about what was actually happening. We had both been performing. In different ways. For different reasons. Both of us afraid. Both of us protecting something. I thought about the woman who stood next to me at the sink that first night. Who asked about the photographs. Who wanted to know the stories. Maybe she had been trying to find her place all along. And maybe neither of us had known how to show her where it was. That thought loosened something in my chest that had been knotted for 7 years. It didn't fix everything. But it opened a door. 3 days after David's visit, there was a knock at my door. not the door flying open the way it always had. A knock. Quiet, almost hesitant. The kind that asks permission before entering. I knew before I opened it. Karen stood on my porch alone. No children. No David. Just her, with her hands clasped in front of her and her eyes that couldn't quite settle on mine. I opened the door all the way. I stepped aside. She came in. I didn't make her stand in the hallway and explain herself. I didn't cross my arms and wait for the right words. I just walked to the kitchen and put on the coffee. She followed. She sat down at the table. And that was enough of a beginning. She didn't give me a speech. I'm glad she didn't. Speeches are for performances, and we had both performed long enough. She just said she was sorry. Simply. Directly. Without dressing it up. I told her I heard her. We sat at that table for 2 hours. We talked about things we had never talked about. Real things, uncomfortable things, the kind of conversation that leaves you tired in a good way. Like you finally set down something heavy. It was not a fairy tale ending.
I want to be honest about that.
There was no moment where everything dissolved and we became the mother and daughter neither of us had managed to be to each other. Some things that break don't go back together the same way. And that's all right. They don't have to. What we built that afternoon was something smaller and more real than that. A foundation, an agreement, without ever stating it outright. To try differently. She has kept her word.
That was 2 years ago now.
She doesn't always get it right. Neither do I. But she has never, not once, spoken to me that way again. And I have never again swallowed something that needed to be said. The grandchildren come on weekends. Lily asks about the photographs now. I don't know if Karen said something to her or if she just grew into it. Either way, I take it. My family is not perfect. No family is. But it is mine. Still whole. Still standing. And those 7 words, the ones I said that morning in my kitchen, with my coffee cup on the counter and 47 years on my back, I will not be treated this way. That's them. All 7. Write them down if you need to. Put them somewhere you can find them. Because the day may come when you need them too. And when it does, don't wait 7 years. If this story touched something in you, you are not alone. There are women everywhere carrying years of silence, wondering if speaking up will cost them everything. If you've ever had to put your foot down, or if you're still gathering the courage to, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. This channel exists because these stories matter, and because every grandmother, every mother, every woman deserves to be heard. If you're new here, subscribe and stay a while. There are more stories coming, honest ones, real ones, the kind nobody else is telling. And if this video made you think of someone who needed to hear it today, share it with her.
She'll know why you did.